So hello to everyone on Zoom and on Instagram Live as well. Or if you are watching this on our YouTube channel, welcome to the third edition of our Tea Talk, a space to share our knowledge, our initiatives, also our ideas and experiences with the King's College London community, and also thanks to technology to everyone around the world that's able and interested to watch this. Today, we are going to focus on the LGBT plus community, especially because we are in the Pride Month. I'm very excited about this. I'm very excited to know what every speaker has to say, because today we have 6 people, and I'm very, very excited. Some of them are going to share more about their knowledge. Other ones are going to share their personal experiences as well. We are going to be receiving some of your questions through Zoom, or also people that are watching now on Instagram Live. You can type your questions and I'm going to be asking after each speaker. We will start, like I said, with some history around the LGBTQ community. And for the speakers, this is going to be repeated for you, but feel free to ask any questions. If after one speaker says something you want to add a comment, please do. Just raise your hand using the icon, the emoji icon that you have on Zoom, or through the chat. Like I said, we are going to have somebody checking also the chat in case we have questions or any comments. And we hope everything goes smoothly with technology. And if not, I have a couple of plan Bs. So that will be all for me now. And I'm going to leave you with Christy. She's going to be the first one. Hello, Christy.
Hello, hi everybody. My name is Kirsty McLaren. At King's, I work in widening participation, but I'm also the co-chair of Proudly Kings, hence the logo in the background, which is the LGBT staff network at King's College London. So there's us, having a lovely time at Pride. This year it's going to be virtual and it's this Friday, so do, join us if you'd like to. This is what I'm going to be covering today. Mainly I'm going to be focusing on the UK and some of the historical oppression worldwide and the start of the modern gay rights movement. Now, the first thing to say is I'm not an academic. I am gay myself, but I do not know everything that there is to know. And it's really important to remember that nobody has the answers, all of the answers. So including people in our community, it's really important that we all continue to learn. So I might even learn something here, probably. But with that being said, let's start with a timeline and roll all the way back to the 1500s. So this is where I'm starting the timeline of LGBT history in the UK. So in 1533, the Parliament under the reign of King Henry VIII passed the Buggery Act. It's the first time in law that male homosexuality was targeted for persecution, and it completely outlawed sodomy in Britain and by extension what would become the British Empire, and convictions were passable by death. Punishable by death, and it's important to know that this was only for homosexual men. Lesbians were not even considered in this because it was unthinkable that women could engage in such unladylike behaviour, I think they would call it. In moving on to 1861, you could no longer be punished with the death penalty under the new Offences Against a Person Act, but it did still carry a minimum of 10 years in prison. It went a little bit further again and making the act of homosexuality illegal, whether or not people were present or not. So that led to a lot of private acts being prosecuted. So this might be with a letter or a witness. And in 1895, Oscar Wilde actually fell victim to this through letters as well. As I mentioned before, female homosexuality was never explicitly targeted by any legislation. It was first discussed in Parliament in 1921 with a view to introducing new discrimination laws, but it ultimately failed when both the House of Commons and Lords rejected it due to fear that a law would draw attention to women to explore homosexuality. It was also assumed that lesbianism occurred in an extremely small pocket of the female population, a fantastic pocket in my view. Moving on to 1946, transgender identities started to become more publicly visible. So in 1946, Michael Dillon self-published a study in endocrinology. Probably said that wrong. Let's hope we don't have any medics. The book, in contemporary times, will be considered an autobiography. And it was the first of its kind to discuss a transgender man undergoing phalloplasty surgery, etc. Michael wrote, "Where a mind cannot be made to fit the body should be made to fit approximately, at any rate, to the mind." Post-World War II, there was a significant rise in arrests and prosecutions of homosexual men. Many were from high ranks and held positions within government and national institutions. You may all know the case of Alan Turing. Alan Turing was a cryptographer who's played a decisive role in breaking of the Enigma code, which eventually led to victory in World War II. But Alan was arrested and underwent chemical castration and ended up ending his life as a result of the trauma. So in 1957, there was a Wolfenden report, and it was commissioned in response to evidence that homosexuality could not be legitimately regarded as a disease. And what this really changed was how the law was carried out in practical terms. So it was more about protecting the public, so to speak, rather than scrutinizing people's private lives. In 1976, the Beaumont Society was set up to provide information and education to the general public, medical and legal professions on what was then termed transvestitism, and encourage research at a fuller understanding. They still exist today, and they are the UK's largest and longest running support group for transgender people and their families. Oh, I've missed one. Sorry, 1967. The Parliament acts on the Wolfenden report and allow homosexuality to be decriminalised for over 21-year-olds and in private, even if they are consenting. So that wasn't the same as the age for heterosexual people. In the wake of the Stonewall riots in New York in June of 1969, over the treatment of the LGBT community by the police, the UK Gay Liberation Front was founded. They fought for the rights of LGBT people, urging them to question the mainstream institutions of society, which led to their oppression. They protested in solidarity with other oppressed groups and organised the very first Pride March in the UK in 1972, which is now an annual event. In 1988, Maggie Thatcher introduced Section 28, which basically banned LGBT being discussed, or what she coined it as, promoting homosexuality in local authorities, schools, etc. And it wasn't until recently, as recent as 2003, that teachers could not speak about LGBT issues in the classroom. Then the age of consent in 2001 is lowered from 21 to 16 to match heterosexual consenting individuals. And in 2003 and 4, Section 28 was revoked, and David Cameron apologised for the Section 28. And Civil Partnerships Act and Gender Recognition Act is introduced. So a lot of people ask, what are the main differences between civil partnerships and marriage? Well, civil partnership legally cannot have anything to do with religion in it. And that was obviously a problem for LGBT people of faith who would want to be married and not have a civil partnership. And that changed as late as 2013. People could marry in the UK under the new Marriages Act. Just a bit of a content warning for the next section. I'm just going to show you the history of sort of worldwide oppression, but there are some discussion topics and images you may find upsetting. There's nothing explicit on there, but the topic might be sensitive. So with that being said, in terms of worldwide oppression, alongside Jews, political prisoners, Romani gypsies, and people with disabilities, members of the LGBT community were targeted by the Nazis in the efforts to eradicate entire communities who are seen as a threat to German people. Between 1933 and 1945, around 100,000 men were arrested in Nazi Germany for homosexuality. 50,000 of those were sentenced, and between 5,000 and 15,000 were sent to concentration camps. And that is what you might see activists wearing that upside down pink triangle, because that is what gay men had to wear in the camps. While it seems so far from the modern ages for that sort of thing to happen, according to independent media and human rights groups, gay men are still sent to clandestine camps in Chechnya. Around 100 have been imprisoned, and at least 3 people have already died. In 2019, the Russian LGBT network said they believe around 40 people have been imprisoned since December of the previous year, 2 of whom they say have died under torture. The top right image there, that is an image of Pulse nightclub, and in 2016 it was the scene of the second deadliest mass shooting ever in the USA, and it claimed the lives of 49 victims and injured a further 53. Obviously that was a prominent, very well-known LGBT spot in Orlando. In the Middle East, there have been 55 documented executions in ISIL-controlled territory since 2014. And in April of 2019, the Sultan of Brunei re-implemented homosexuality being punishable by death. And this man, the Sultan of Brunei, held an honorary degree from King's College London. Well, I say he held a degree. That was until our network got involved and pushed through the unprecedented decision to revoke his degree following his actions. If you search for that, it will come up on BBC, KCL, wherever. So the modern movement really started in 1969 following the Stonewall riots. They were not the first protests or confrontations between the police and the LGBT community, but they've become symbolic of the growing consciousness and confidence that paved the way to fight for equality and freedom from discrimination. What triggered the Stonewall riots was a police raid on the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall Inn was at the heart of Manhattan's Greenwich Village, and it was a mafia-run bar that was a hub for the neighborhood's marginalized LGBT community. One of the main people involved in the uprising was an outspoken advocate for gay rights, Marsha P. Johnson, a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front. Marsha co-founded the radical activist group Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR for short, and you can see her and her co-founder Sylvia Riviera on the screen there. In the late 60s, police raids on bars like Stonewall Inn were commonplace. They were part of the continuing harassment and victimization of LGBT people. The raid on the Stonewall Inn sparked the sense of frustration into violent protests that started for 6 days and received widespread media coverage. So when we see all of the colourful celebratory pride parades, it's often forgotten that pride started as a riot led by a Black trans woman. It's not only racist homophobes who think this, but I do enjoy reminding them on Twitter. So this is Caitlin Bennett. She's the Katie Hopkins of the USA. And she tweeted, "The one good thing about these protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, is that they've effectively cancelled the Pride Month. And it gives me great pleasure in my very, very small following to retweet her and remind her that this is Pride. Pride was a riot started by Black people against police brutality." We're living in Pride right now. In terms of achievements, the UK have, the basic human rights. In USA, there's been some progress in following the states, although I'll tell you in a minute about how those are being drawn back. We have to acknowledge those huge achievements, but recognise for a lot of anti-LGBT people, it gives an easy excuse to block the movement because, you already have your rights. So for me, it's more important to focus on the challenges that we still face. So in the UK in particular, hate crime has gone up since it's been reported that hate crimes have doubled in the last 5 years. That is an image from last December where 2 lesbian women were attacked on a bus in London, supposedly one of the most diverse places in the world. In terms of racism, a recent Stonewall report said that 51% of Black and minority ethnic LGBT people had experienced discrimination from within our own community. That is not even just the racism they experience every single day outside of the community. We have a challenge with otherisms at the moment. So LGBT people who are religious or who are disabled people also also have experienced discrimination, and it's almost like we're not understanding people's nuances and understanding that you can have multiple identities. One of the most frightening ones for me is the new movement of the TERFs, which are trans exclusionary radical feminists. And you have J.K. Rowling, who is one of the most influential people in the world, voicing opinions which are entirely incorrect about trans people, having never spoken to a trans person herself. If you want to know more about that issue and why everything that she's doing is so wrong, I would encourage you to read the open letter to J.K. Rowling from Mermaids UK. It goes through each of her points and brilliantly explains what's so wrong about them. In terms of the US, you really can just boil it down to the biggest challenge. Oh, pardon me, I've forgotten this. This is why we still need to remember our history, because if we look at each of these challenges that we're facing, so, hate crime and standing up against hate crime, racism, oppression and otherism, and the challenges faced by the trans community, all of that is where it started, and people are forgetting where we started and are sort of using this for their own agenda. So I always think, what would Marsha P do? And it's not any of those things. Certainly not anything that J.K. Rowling is doing. And in my opinion, she can get in the bin. In terms of the challenges of the US, they can be pretty much boiled down to the Trump administration. Everything that the Obama administration had put through, they are pulling back and in some cases going the opposite way to actively discriminate. They've withdrawn guidance for schools to protect young people. They've attempted to pass a bill which allows employers to actively discriminate against LGBT employees. They reversed the Obama administration protection for trans people in healthcare and encouraged hospital officials, etc., to deny care to patients, including transgender patients, if it doesn't go with their religious or moral beliefs. Transgender people have been banned from serving in the military in any role. Trump has illegally allowed prisoners to be held in same-sex housing, which causes a lot of issues in prisons and a lot of people who are incredibly worried about their safety. He's allowed adoption agencies in North Carolina to discriminate against LGBT adopters. He opposed the Equality Act and he has banned LGBT asylum seekers from entering the USA. So that is just a few, but there's people who would have gone from their lifetime seeing all of these inequalities that they had, and they were given to them by the Obama administration, and now they're being slowly stripped away. So it must be quite challenging to be in that environment at the moment. And the last thing I'll say is just the worldwide context. So as of 2019, there are 11 countries with constitutional protection for consensual homosexual attraction. So in my mind, the good guys. There's 55 with broad protection, 8 with limited protection, and 55 who have no protection, but also no criminalization. There are 2 countries who criminalize homosexuality. A further 30 of those countries are punishable with up to 8 years in prison. And there's 27 countries with 10 years to life in prison, and 12 countries still have the death penalty. There are enormous ways we all need to go for our rights to still be equal throughout the world, and that needs to be considered with people's multiple identities in mind as well. So I know I was supposed to focus on a lot of the achievements, and I hope that I did give thumbs up to that, but I do think we really need to continue talking about the challenges and why it's not just enough to give somebody a law that says you can marry somebody else, because that doesn't really solve the issues. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll stick around for a little bit if anybody does have any questions.
Thank you so much, Christy. I think you did an amazing job trying to explain how this movement came from, why there's still so many challenges, because that is a question that sometimes pops into people that are heterosexual, like, okay, but they can get married, so what are they fighting about? And I think I love that the word that they use is pride, and not like fight, because it's like pride. I'm proud to be who I am, and I'm proud to defend my ideals. And I just wanted to end with a final comment, because I know Helena has a short time, that everything that you said about, for example, how can I feel or what my identity is very political and has to do with the law. Like, if the whole world says, okay, being gay is fine, but there's countries that say you can get the death penalty. So it's like, it's complete, like the personal is political. I think in this is completely obvious and clear.
Yeah.
So I really hope you stay longer, because maybe we can come back to some of the questions, but I want to give Helena her space as well.
Yes, please do. I will mute myself for a little bit.
Can you stop sharing your screen? Because I know Helena wants to do that. And yeah, a lot of applauses for you, of course. Okay, Helena, now you can unmute.
Hi, I'm Helena. My pronouns are she, her, and I identify as gay. So I guess I'm going to be talking a bit about some of my experiences and my journey. And the same as Kirsty, I guess, thinking a bit about how a lot has changed, but also a lot hasn't. And I'll be looking at that on a bit more of a sort of micro level rather than a macro one, I guess. So in terms of my personal experiences, I came out to close friends when I was 16. And then over the next few years, started coming out to more people and to my family. And I'm just about to graduate from uni. And while I've been there, I've got really into drag. I had started doing sort of the makeup of drag before I got there, but it was when I got to uni and saw my university's drag society perform that I thought, I want to do that. So I basically made up an act so I could start performing. So just for the duration of this, I've just got a set of photos of various looks and performances. There we go. So hopefully my slow laptop will, there we go. Sorry, my laptop does not like me. There we go. So yeah, these are just a load of photos of things over the last couple of years, I guess. So I started performing as a drag king in 2018 and came second at the Man Up competition last year, which is the top left and top right photos. And the one in the bottom row in the suit ended up in Vogue Italia, which was a bizarre and wild time. And then over time I also started doing drag queen performances, and I've really enjoyed sort of playing with expectations of what drag is and what drag should be. I think especially trying to dismantle the idea that drag is for white, gay, cis men. And I think that is definitely something I've experienced. I worked in a nightclub for a bit as a performer, but I felt I was treated very differently to the cisgender male performers there, and found it really demoralizing. And so I think, like Kirsty was saying, there are so many intersections of oppression and within the drag community as well, things like misogyny and racism and transphobia that shows like RuPaul's Drag Race just can't show. And I think that's really important to remember. And it's been really exciting over the last couple of years to sort of see the drag king community and see women doing drag really starting to take off. So with drag, I've performed, as I said, at Man Up, in various theatres, at the Edinburgh Fringe, at Pride events, May balls, at uni, so all sorts of different venues. And I've also done other theatre works, and I think whether consciously or not, my sexuality probably has influenced a lot of these things. And I had very poor mental health in my teens, and looking back, I do think that it wasn't the only part of it, certainly, but I do think that my sexuality was a factor in that. And in the past few years, I've also done workshops in secondary schools about LGBT plus identities. And that's been really interesting because it's always just the biggest joy to talk to a load of 15-year-olds and critique drag race with them, and things like talking about why it's good and all the good things it has done, but also what it could do better. And that is always so much fun. And I was also the LGBT plus officer at my students' union, and that as well was just so much fun and such a joy to be able to do these things. But as Kirsty has said, I find it really frustrating when people act like everything's okay now and the fight is over, because even in LGBT plus spaces, there's still a lot of different influences and oppressions that exist. And being LGBT officer and going into schools and performing drag as a woman, there are definitely a lot of battles that I've had to fight. And so I went to Cambridge, which is sometimes described as the gayest university in the country. And in a lot of ways that was amazing, but I still got shouted at most times I walked home at night, whether in drag or not. And I think it is, you know, and that was usually from young people. And I think it is important to remember that these discriminations haven't gone away. And, you know, that a lot of us, well, all of us are still really fighting against individuals and institutions who are trying to oppress us. And then, as Franny said, I do have to hop in a minute because I have another commitment, but I did want to talk a bit about representation as well, and just how important representation is. When I was at uni, I somewhat by chance joined a sort of regional group for LGBT plus women and non-binary people, and I went along to the first event with my friend, and we were a lot younger than most of the other people there, so all of them really were above 50, and we got really emotional because we realized we'd never really seen a happier queer older woman, and that was so important in terms of us being able to imagine a future for ourselves. And I think that's what representation boils down to, is being able to see yourself reflected gives you hope, and seeing different facets of yourself reflected, and that's been really important. And that's why I think hopefully measures to keep improving visibility and obviously equality, which there is still a long way to go on, are all so important, because it enables people to not see themselves as a dead end and not see sort of only unhappiness in their future, which I think for a lot of queer people it can feel like that sometimes. So that's a sort of potted discussion of some of my experiences, and I put my drag Instagram on the screen, so my handle is King Hoberon. So please do follow if you want to. Obviously I'm currently in hibernation at home and I've just finished my degree, so I've sort of been sleeping a lot, but in the future I am hoping to start performing drag again and using it as part of a creative career. So please do hop on my Instagram, which I will put content on that isn't, you know, 5 months old in the future. Yes, Kirsty. But yeah, thank you so much for listening and for having me. And I'm so sorry I have to jump, but I'm looking forward to watching the rest on YouTube because I want to hear everyone else speaking in the discussion.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Say one phrase before you leave. It's like how amazing sometimes this struggle can be, that you need to create a space to be seen and to be heard. And that's what you did. So I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of all the things that you have done. I don't like that it had to become such a struggle, of course, but to be seen and to be heard is what everyone needs.
Thank you. Yeah. And I said, I just hope that things will keep moving in the right direction, and that everyone who needs to be seen and needs to be heard and deserves to be seen and heard gets to be.
Just before you go, Helena, I went to school with Helena in secondary school, and just seeing, like, I'm actually feeling like quite emotional, just seeing the way that you have evolved since we were like 15, 16 and like going through it. Like, I'm just so proud, and I might cry. Like, I'm just so proud of you, and just everything you're doing makes me so happy. So yeah, please keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much, Kirsty, as well, for your talk. I also have to dash, but yeah, thank you so much, everyone, especially Helena. Okay.
Thank you for having me, and have a beautiful evening. And also, like, drop me a message on Instagram, any of you, if you ever want to chat about things or collaborate. My DMs are always open. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Right.
So if it's okay with you, Angie, would you like to go now? Yes? Do you have something to share, or is going to be just your screen, like your video?
Since we talked this morning, I guess it's going to be improv. This
No
is an improv
problem.
challenge. And nice to meet you all. I'm Chilean, just as Francisca is. So I'm going to do my best effort to actually speak a legible English. So if you have any doubt or I need some translation, I think that Francisca could help with that. Well, my name is Angie Hernandez. I'm a trans activist in Chile, more precisely a trans feminist activist. My road to activism was quite special because I didn't start in LGBTI organizations. I started on politics on my university, which was the same as Francisca, the Pontifical University of Chile, Catholic University of Chile. You try to forget the name of the university, really. It's a little on the conservative side, or at least it has some groups that are really dangerous in their ideologies, and therefore it was not necessarily a great time studying in that university, particularly because politics back then, which was like 6 years ago, but we as society have changed so much in Chile in 6 years. I mean, we passed from a social crisis that ends out last year in a social burst, which practically separate the society in two. So we have definitely evolved in that time, but at that moment, even though I was working on a left field organization, and it was really hard to find understanding. I actually had probably only one other LGBTI. I know that in England you probably use the LGBTQI, but in Chile we use only until the I, just because the abbreviation of the queerness is really new for us. So sorry if I come off with the Q. And that person was also studying psychology. He was the one, he was a gay male, and he was the one who brought many conversations on the table about sexuality. And actually was one of who leads a center of studies about gender from students in my university. I didn't did quite as much, but I positioned the trans talk in my university. It wasn't a match because you have to do baby steps with the people, especially when your partners or the people that you work with are the ones who are constantly thinking that because you are LGBTI+, you are basically the genius of the LGBT world, and it puts a lot of pressure on you and actually stigmatizes you a lot. And so my path to enter to these LGBTI plus organizations was very late because I was really afraid to be only seen as a trans person. I think I came from a very low income background, so for me being in college, I was the first person in my family to be in college. Was really a ton of pressure to understand if I was doing that because of something that was imposed to me, or I was doing that because I like it. And it was the same with my transness. And I felt like so many people was seeing me as my transness and the way that evolved. Many people questioned me why I wasn't doing my hormonal treatment during all of those college years, and they were supposed to be my friends. So clearly they're not my friends anymore, but they were constantly thinking like, oh yeah, when you took hormones, you're going to be so pretty, or you're going to reach that prettiness when you, I don't know, with your surgeries, you know? And it was a lot of hate coming from those words, and I think that it has to be with the misinformation that many of us have here in Chile, and that you actually have to discover from countries like UK or USA, or from Europe in general, and to learn about how big is the spectrum of identities. So it was a long way from identifying myself as a male, after that as a trans woman, and after that to identify myself as a non-binary trans. It was actually thanks to an invitation that the Netherlands made to my then workplace, which was organizing trans diversities, or OTD, which is the strongest trans organization in Chile. That I came from to Netherlands last year, and actually I had a realization like, yeah, here people is truly free, and I could be without makeup, and people will not question my gender identity, and no one is raising these questions, and no male in the streets is like, handshake me, because we have these two modes of saying hello, like a kiss or the handshake, and most male here, even though they know me from years, they still handshake me, or they basically deny my identity every time they say hello to me, and it happens a ton. I mean, a ton. And so I think that being a non-binary person and having that realization was more because I want to feel a little more in place and safe, and to respect me more, because I was in a mental path to feel like I was only how people perceive me. And coming from where I come, it's really important for me to not get in the mindset. It's really hard here to be a trans person and to be a non-binary person. From my family that really reject me, still, even though they have this acceptation, there's always a talk like, we are doing so much effort to get to understand you and to respect you, and you don't appreciate that. But when it comes to the moment, my mom say, I don't want to see you with makeup, I don't want to see you with dresses, I don't want to see you with long hair, or you don't come to my house. And when I talked to my mom when I was 17 and tell her that I was transgender, she said that I kill her. So there are so many words that you really want to, in a certain moment, hide, or you want to run away from that. And that actually was the mindset I was trying to escape, because that was like, I was doing that because of how I need to society to perceive me, to be accepted and to be respected. And I think that last year, and I think that's my prior history between that and about this, is like, last year when I had this realization that I was a non-binary, I actually was the first time that I felt free and that I felt myself, because I was not talking about my gender anymore. I was just being me and being focused on myself and my true self. I mean, now I'm using makeup, but I told myself and I promised myself that I will only use makeup in special events like this, when I have an invitation, because for so many years I had to put makeup to try to fit in society, and I realized that I was fitting, but I was fitting with my own expectation, and I was fitting with myself, and I had to stop trying to be someone else and to fit with what people told me to do, because that was unauthentic, and that was making me worse and making me even more sad and feeling even more oppressed. Actually, for me, being trans is not an oppression, it's freedom, is living myself and living who I am, but it is society what oppresses you. It is living in a certain context, and visiting Europe, I actually realized that it was the context. It was not me. And that context is what comes to your mind and try to tell you like, you don't worth, you have no worth, and you have no place in this world. So my message talking to this is say like, we have fight so much, and it's so important to have representation in different medias and be recognized as who we are. But we are not only our gender or sexuality. We are so much more, and the richness that it is in our humanity and in the way that we approach to things is so unique, because when you live multiple oppressions, when you understand the position of being not only trans, but being poor, or being gay, or being lesbian, or being all those etiquettes that only for a certain amount of people are wrong or are a bad thing, you have that special perspective because of those oppressions. You can see the world with another pair of glasses, and I think that's the beauty of being who we are, is like we can appreciate a different taste of what the world is, and we have another perspective and so much perspective about how we need to treat other people and to respect other people because we value that so much. And I think that's a more important gift than being called trans. It's like having the recognitions to understand that you want to do something for this world that is beyond your gender. And right now I want to specify that it's not because I don't do more activism, but it's more about that I understood that I didn't want to only help transgender people. I want to do my part to do this world better. And so I'm a community psychologist. I work in an NGO. I work with people who have vulnerabilities, but I also work with, I have worked with migrant people, with foreign, how I need a translation, migrante.
Yeah, with migrants.
With migrants. And I have worked with homeless people, and those stories and those oppressions have brought a ton of more richness and grow to my own perspective of the world. So that's it. Sorry for being in improvisation. And I wish to have a more structured script, but I'm really happy for Francisca's invitation, Fran's invitation, and about to meet you also. And I just want to say that we have a more rough time maybe in Chile, but we're still very lucky. I mean, we are the luckiest country LGBTI plus wise from Latin America. We have very little homicides to LGBT people, even though we have a ton of aggression to LGBT people. But that's still a privilege in this type of countries. You don't want to be a privilege, but it is. So, and I want to share that even though we are not in Europe, and even though we have our struggles, and we can say that we have the pride, we are still developing that pride and that freedomness. We are advancing also, and we are advancing because society is moving, and because we are understanding every day better, even though we have TERF people here too, which are very aggressive in general. And we have a lot of help for other movements, and we are understanding that working together is actually the way to work. So
Thank you so much, Angie. You said a lot of very important things that I think also Christy was saying, and then Helena was saying, because like you said, it's intersectional. It's not something that is unique to one person. It's not isolated incidents. And I think something very important that you were mentioning in the beginning is that when we say, okay, I have thought about this and I think I'm trans, immediately it's like people need to put you in a box And that's how our brain works. Like if we don't know what we are seeing, we get very anxious. So we need to have some idea. Like, okay, but it's a girl or it's a boy? Okay, but it was a girl that was born a girl and now it's a boy. So everyone started asking. And like you say, you became the advocate. Like if you're trans, you know everything about trans history and you can represent them all over the world. And it's something very big to someone that's like dealing with their own identity as well. And the other thing, you were going to
and it comes to your mind. That's the most important thing that I'm trying to tell, because okay, I work in the social field, so I feel like I'm doing something. But by example, we have the first president in the Chilean University of Chile.
Yeah.
I don't know how to translate that, but it's the other big elitist university in Chile, educational wise, and she was the president of the student, the body student president, and so many people questioning that she's just there because she's trans. And I have talked with Emilia, and she had the same feeling, like, I'm doing this because I'm trans. I'm like, it's like me because I'm trans, because that's what I put to the table. And she's like, it's like, no, girl, you are an amazing person. You understand politics right. You are studying to be a great lawyer. So you have what it takes. It's not because you're trans, but it's the self-doubt, you know? It's the self-doubt that the people understand you.
Exactly. And I think also regarding the context in Chile, so people know we don't have equal marriage. We recently got in 2015 the agreement one, so they can get married, but it's not marriage. So we are still fighting that. So I wanted to ask Christy, for example, how does it feel to hear? Because when you show that map, like Chile is in some kind of protection, but not that much. So for us, coming to a place like Europe is like, oh my God, here there are human rights. But in your mind and in everything that you have shown, it's also like there's still so much to do. And I think one challenge is that we shouldn't settle, because of course, if you have been fighting your whole life and then you go to Amsterdam and then people treat you better, you're like, okay, I'm here, like this is my home. But in Amsterdam, people that are trans or they are from the LGBT community, they're probably struggling with some things as well. So it's not something that you reach. It's not like, okay, checklist and then everything is fine. It's about like what you were saying, Angie. It's not only about your gender, or what we were talking last week. It's not only the skin of the color of your skin, but it has been for so many centuries that it's the first thing that comes to your mind, and it's related with the politics, with the type of education that you have, with the type of jobs that you have, especially in Chile, that's a very sexist country. If you don't look like you should look, that can also influence in your job interviews. So it's like everything is interconnected. And I think I really love what you said, like trans is freedom, because you found, like in that label, you found something that is truly yours and it's only Angie, and it's not maybe another trans person will feel different. And that's okay. It's just a label that helps you. It's not the only label.
But it is a common conclusion, I feel like. In the moment I work with transgender people in the OTT, you have to understand that, I mean, everyone has to find their home in themselves. Because that's the thing. I mean, I went to Netherlands and really that was what happened. I feel like, oh, okay, I found my home, but it's not my home. It's a place when I'm respected and where I'm loved. And so you can do that with yourself, but you need people, you need networks, you need people who help you to understand that you are not wrong, that you are not doing this and you're not sick, that you are not bad, that you are just yourself, and that you have to love yourself. And that's the long process, to understand how to love yourself in the middle of people screaming you that you shouldn't, because you are not the way that society tells you to be.
I don't know if anybody has a question for Angie now. They can come after, of course. You're always hearing more people and you start thinking about something. But if you have a question, this is the moment. No? Okay. Are you going to stay here? Well, in the Instagram live, somebody put a heart to you, so just so you know. So the next person that I have, he's also Chilean. He's a psychologist. In the UK, that will be a therapist, because we try to separate for the medical view, but he works in mental health. He couldn't be here today because of, well, we have 5 hours difference and he's working right now. But we pre-recorded a video and I think it will be very nice to see it. And just to present the video before, so I have a story. In 2016, I did a short study in Chile regarding the different types that you can be a family and how you consider yourself to be a family. So if I ask you, if you think of your family, what image comes to your mind? So I did that question to people that were from the LGBT community, people that were straight, people that were with couples, people that were single. And I remember one particular case. He was a man of around 45-year-old, and he was gay, and he had a partner, another man, and they had similar stories. So his story was that he was born and he was raised during the dictatorship that we have in Chile. And like Christy said, in the dictatorship, also people that were gay were persecuted as the left wing. So of course, nobody will say openly, I'm gay, because that meant that you could be killed. So he was raised in that context. So he always thought that something was wrong about him. Like, this is wrong. He was Catholic as well. Like, I shouldn't be thinking about men. I need to forget about this. It's just distraction. And even if I say, okay, I'm gay, then I could be killed. So he did an amazing job in hiding that, because he managed to live a life that he calls very successful. He found a woman that he actually loved. Thank you, Angie. That he actually loved. And he said, yeah, like, she's like my best friend. We're going to get married. And they got married. And then after the years came by, he realized that he was in love with another man that worked with him at the gym. And for him, it was very, very hard, of course, to try to dismantle this whole life, to try to tell her. And of course, at the beginning, it was very hard. But for him, the most important part was honesty. So he managed to tell her, and they have a very good relationship because they have kids. And the important part of the story, linking it to what the next speaker will say, is that he was so afraid to tell his kids. His kids were like 5 and 7. He was so afraid that they were going to think badly about him, that they're going to not want to talk to him anymore. And his kids said, okay, Dad, you like boys. And for him, it was like, my kids accepted it faster than I did. Like, for them, it was like, yeah, of course, you love someone, and it's not a girl, it's a boy. And the generation, at least in context like Chile, for example, it's so big that it's more often to have people that are 40 and they're just coming out than to actually talk about sexual education in schools. And that's changing, and that's why now people will come out when they're like 12 or 14. And I use the quotes because only LGBT community people have to come out, but nobody has that conversation with people that are heterosexual. And I think that's also something very important to point out, that it's like imperative that if you are not like the norm, then you need to explain everybody else what that means. And because of that, Danilo, the next speaker, he's going to talk about mental health and sexuality more in a broader space, not only about the LGBT community, but also about how do we know more about ourselves in this quest of understanding more of ourselves, and maybe using some of these labels to understand us, but not to put us in boxes. So I'm going to be sharing the video because, like I said, he couldn't come, but if you have any questions, we can have a conversation after that, and then I can tell him as well. So, sharing my screen. I had a question in the chat. Hello, Ruby. So we have 6 people. We already have 3, and now we have the video. We have Emma, and if we are fortunate with the internet, we will have Aníbal at the end. If not, we only have 2 more. But you can have this, the whole meeting is going to be recorded on YouTube, so you cannot attend to the whole meeting, you will be able to see that. So everybody can see the video? Yes? So we are coming to our fourth speaker. His name is Danilo. He works in mental health, like I said. He's also from Chile, so if you have any questions about any words that he uses because of his accent, then please, no problem, to just let me know and I will help you.
Hello. So thank you so much for giving me your time. I know you really wanted to talk with us on Tuesday, but like for the schedule, you were not able. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you. I'm really looking forward to what you have to say. And if you can introduce yourself, please.
Of course. My name is Danilo Uvina. I'm from Chile, from South America. And I'm a psychologist by profession. I'm finishing my official training as a sexologist. And I identified myself as belonging to the LGBT plus community. And in this Pride Month, it seems important to me to talk about diversity. And I am here with Namu here.
Oh, hello, Namu. Yeah, he wanted to be part of the talk as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could tell me and tell everyone that will be listening to you which initiatives you are working on and why do you think these initiatives are important for the LGBT community?
Great. Yes. I'm one of the directors of the Escuela Transdisciplinaria de Sexualidad. That means a transdisciplinary school of sexuality, which is a team of professionals composed by sexologists, therapists, and doctors. Our aim is to improve the knowledge about around sexual education and therefore contribute to improve our sexual health. And we provided psychotherapy and medical consultation, sex therapy, and learning opportunities. We run a sexuality diploma to train professionals from health services, education, social science, activism, who wants to have tools in the area. In Chile, we have very little sexual educations in our educational curriculum. It is not holistic, and the few times that is carried out, it is usually focused only on reproduction. I think that happens in several countries. It is essential to understand that sexuality has to do with multiple aspects of our life, affections, identities, bodies, emotions, self-esteem, behaviors, eroticism, sexual practices, diversities, and non-conforming identities, and much more. It's very important to understand the integral character of sexuality and be aware that of the way social norms are imposed on us. Integrative sex education can free us by allowing us to question these norms and regain recognition and connection with ourselves.
Yeah, I'm getting that it's very important to know ourselves a little bit better, because if we have the social norms telling us who we should be and we don't even know who we are, and we are trying to pick some of these norms and to pick some of our own experiences, I think to know ourselves is something very important for all of this.
Yes, give me a second because I have to...
Okay, perfect. Pause.
Well, self-knowledge is essential, from allowing space for self-exploration and recognition and validation, having human rights as the ethical base. A good example of this has to do with the big variety of sexual orientations, gender identities, biological sexes, and gender expressions. Also, various sexual practices, relational orientations, and more. Now it is necessary to understand that sexuality is also influenced by social, cultural, historical, political, económico. ¿Se lo habíamos dicho? ¿Me equivoqué o no?
No está bien.
¿Sigo nomás? Historical, political, economic, religious, spiritual variables, and more. And that, therefore, Our ways of living it are flexible, and the labels with which we identify are not rigid. The numbers and names of the different sexual identities aren't rigid either. Every so often, there are new ways to address them, which can help us a lot to recognize and understand ourselves, to feel part of a community, like the acronym LGBT, which is often followed by IQA+, which refers to lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex, queer or questioning, asexual, and more. But sometimes they can also limit us by not allowing us to continue exploring freely. Sexuality itself is something that we never stop discovering, exploring, and living. So when you take one of these names, you are at risk of restricting the framework where the sexuality is lived. These labels could be useful for us at some times and could restrain us at other times. The good thing is that we can change them, flow, and that's fine. There are models that can help us understand part of the multiple diversities and their nuances, such as the genderbread person that is already in its 4th version. You can know more about it in this website, genderbread.org. The genderbread reflects how these different variables can be interconnected in multiple ways.
Yeah, I found that genderbread very, very helpful because it's very visual, so you can actually see. And it's also good to explain how somebody can be, I don't know, a female transgender person, but also likes women, but likes to wear this kind of clothes. So it's like, it's different layers of how human beings are. And I also wanted to ask you about one of these names of the LGBT community that usually is not quite oftenly spoken, like, and it's around asexuality. At least when I was growing up, nobody was ever talking about that one. So I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, of course. In all of this diversity, it is interesting to mention the configuration of sexual desire, which is directly related to the labels of asexuality, demisexuality, or gray sexuality. I'm not sure if it's correct, this translation, but maybe it works too. We are in a social cultural context in which the mandate to be sexually active with a high sexual desire is usually sought. However, not all people feel it and live like this. There are people who do not have an interest in the sexual act, and this is fine, and it does not generate discomfort of them. If that does not generate discomfort, or that they require an emotional bond to reach an erotic bond. The problem here could be in the mismatch of sexual desire with a partner. That is when the partner has a different level of desire that is changeling and requires validation, communication, negotiation, and more.
Now that you're talking about partners, I know that you usually give some workshops around polyamor and non-monogamous relationships. I just wanted to ask you if you can end talking a little bit about that.
Yes. Another area that I would like to mention is ethical non-monogamy. They questioned monogamy to be the only valid relationship model. Again, another norm, the mono norm, to be monogamous. It is important to mention that they do not impose a new norm. It doesn't seek for everyone to be non-monogamous, but that there are many forms of emotional sex bonding. which, if being in an ethical framework of transparency, communication, trust, affective responsibility, among other variables, can generate tremendously healthy relationships. There are those who do not fit into monogamy, but that unfortunately try to force this model into their way of living, denying a part of themselves the possibility of having more than one stable affective sex link at the same time. Polyamory is one of the types of ethical non-monogamy, but even in polyamory, there are many types of agreements, structures, forms, hierarchies, all based on consent and continuous negotiation and communication. So we have all this diversity.
It's all about diversity, I think. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time. And I think you cover a lot of important points, because in this quest that we have of knowing who we are, like if we should join some community, like where do we belong in our gender, in our identity and our sexual orientation, I think sometimes we can get misled to try to fit in one of the categories, like being heterosexual or having a partner for your whole life. And sometimes we maybe feel that's not for us. And then we can feel alone, like, okay, so which is my community? Where do I fit in? And I think sometimes because of that, we don't allow ourselves to know more about ourselves a little bit more. So I just was wondering if you have any last words for all of us and everyone that's now hearing you on Tuesday.
Yes, the same. There are so many ways to experience sexuality. The main thing is to allow us to recognize diversities and to ask ourselves critically about the norms that are imposed on us, and to keep exploring, respecting, of course, everybody's human rights and sexual rights.
Thank you so much, Danilo. And a big thank you for everyone that's listening now.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We had Danilo there with us, and I think he mentioned very important points, because we can identify ourselves as being part of the LGBT community, to be heterosexual, but we also live in a community when we are very social. So if we are going to have, for example, a partner, there's a whole different life that is there, and we have the social norms, and also what Angie was saying, sometimes we feel that we need to fit in, and even if we say, okay, we are from the LGBT community, then we need to fit in a particular one. And I think one of the important things that Danilo was saying is that this is not something that ends. Like the way that we experience and the way that we want to live our sexuality can change in the course of our life. And I think it has to be with how comfortable and confident we feel to be able to express it, or to be able to know a little bit more about that. We will have one last speaker, that's Emma. Aníbal was the sixth one, but he, so just to tell you two things about him, he is an actor, he does musical theater, and he is currently stuck in the middle of the ocean in a ship because he was part of the Disney cruise, and the pandemic came, and he's stuck in the boat because he cannot come back to Chile because he is like circling some ports of the US. Because of that, he has no signal. So he was trying to send me a video for the whole day, but unfortunately it hasn't arrived. But I'm going to upload that video in the RESILIFE account, so on Instagram. So it's at King's RESILIFE. So probably tomorrow you're going to be able to see what he had to say, because he is very sad that he cannot join us today. And just one last comment before we go to our last speaker, Emma. One of the things that Aníbal was going to say, and I really wanted this point at least to be heard, is about the myth. So there are a lot of myths around everything, but around the LGBT community, there are so many. And I think that sometimes make us afraid to maybe identify with them, or maybe to ask questions even. So for example, just to talk about two that were not said today, but for example, bisexuality. There is a big myth that if you're bisexual, then you like are attracted to everyone that is on earth, basically, and that you're not going to be able to have a partner because you're always going to be wandering. So being bisexual doesn't mean that you want every girl and every man, of course. It just means that you are attracted to people that are men and people that are women. But that doesn't mean that you are a hypersexualized person per se. That has to do with who you are, not because you're bisexual. And also there is different ways of identifying as bisexual. It can be 50-50, it can be 10-90. It doesn't mean that you are half every time 50-50. No, maybe you really like guys and then sometimes you have curiosity. It doesn't mean, it's not something fixed. And I think that's something very important to mention, that we don't need to make a new box for us. We just need to explore it a little bit more and maybe jump from one box to the other. And the other myth is about demisexual people. So demisexuality is part of the A-grade sexualities that will go from allosexuality, that will be the norm, for example. The most common one, that you have a sexual desire. It could be heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, but you have sexual desire. And then you have asexuality, when you don't experience sexual desire, or if you do, it's very, very, like, few times. Demisexuality will be in the middle, and it means that you need something extra to awaken that desire. So for example, a connection or more intimacy, or to know the person before you experience the desire. It's not the same as saying, I don't want to have sex with someone that I don't know. Is that I don't feel the desire to have sex. It's different. The difference is the desire. And one of the myths of the demisexuality is that you are seeking only to have one partner for your whole life, or that if you say, yes, I have sexual desire, that means you're in love. That's not the case. It can be, but it's not the case all the time. And like that, there are so many other myths. But now I really want to leave you with Emma and the last presentation for today. And of course, if you have any more questions, I'm still observing everything. So your time, Emma.
Hey. You nearly caught me eating a really sour grape then, and I was like, and I was watching myself on Instagram live eating grapes. I was like, why am I eating grapes while I'm on a podcast? So yeah, I'm Emma. I am a second year and very terrifyingly nearly final year student midwife here at King's College London. I've literally got this all written down on a bit of paper, because if you let me loose on a podcast, we will be here for hours. So I'm going to touch a little bit on my personal experience and a little tiny bit on the global perspective on what it's like to be LGBTQ+ in healthcare. So it's kind of like a little story, if I'm honest. It's quite nice to end on. Okay, so I'm going to start with me. I realised I was queer at a tender age and made my life even more tender by coming out at age 13. I spent a fair amount of time at secondary education when I had come out, with people often asking me when I was going to come out of sort of like this attention-seeking phase. And I also had good friends of mine often shy away from me in the changing rooms. And I kind of began to wonder what was the point in all this, you know, in having come out at quite a young age. I thought that was, you know, that was going to be it. I was set. I'd come out, everyone knew who I was, it was going to get easier. And unfortunately it just got harder. So some years later, aged 20, I decided to shave my head for no apparent reason, just got fed up of having hair. And this was at a time when I was working in a bar. So a little bit about me is I have lived on a very tiny island for nearly 24 years in the lovely county of Essex. And that little island is particularly far right, particularly narrow-minded, and particularly backwards with our times. So when I was working at this bar, you can imagine me 20 years of age, shaved-headed and female. So I'd often have countless drunk men make derogatory comments asking me if I was a dyke, or I would have all female Prosecco fueled parties that would ask for one of my colleagues to serve them in the fear that I was going to come onto them. So that was my sort of teen experience of being queer. And this one experience actually sort of changed how I looked at myself. So one afternoon I took myself for a contraceptive appointment, and sitting in the waiting room, shaved head, waiting to be called by the nurse, she entered without me knowing, looked around and left. Some 10 minutes later, she returned and called my name, Emma, in a very confused state of mind, having looked at her clipboard and looked around, and said to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realise if you were a boy or a girl." And for me, that was like a really big changing point in my life, where I've always been comfortable, like my pronouns are she and her. I've always been comfortable in what I identify in terms of my gender. And all of a sudden, I was in my 20s, and because I'd cut my hair, other people were able to put this new identification on me that even I didn't know about. So leading on from that, as Kirsty spoke about Stonewall, which is also Britain's leading charity for LGBTQ equality, exposed that those within this community who do decide to seek medical support, that 1 in 8 have experienced some form of unequal treatment from healthcare staff because of what they identify as. And a quarter of LGBTQ individuals have faced a lack of understanding of their specific health needs, and this figure raises to 62% of trans patients. So following on from that, age 21, I started my midwifery degree here at King's, where I sit in my little box room in halls during this pandemic. And although I knew this was going to change my life, you know, being a healthcare professional, but with my past experiences still looming in the back of my mind, I was conscious of being queer, even more so now in a predominantly female healthcare sector, caring for females in a fully female cohort. That is a lot of women. And I have had people who have asked me, is it difficult being queer and a student midwife? And I remember the first time someone asked me, actually took me a minute to understand where this question was coming from. And then I realised that they thought that I was exercising my position for sexual gain because I'm attracted to women. I have somehow wrote a personal statement, attended various interviews around the country, left my home in Essex, pay £9,500 a year just to have access to women, when you can download Tinder for free. It's a lot cheaper and a lot quicker. So having to actually even explain to someone that, no, I haven't gone into midwifery because I want sexual gratification from being around women, feels wrong to even have that conversation. And from that little rant and that little story about my life, my boring little life, you can see that I have been at the hands of prejudice, and I also practice in an institution that practices prejudice, which is a really hard concept, because I have to look into myself and ask myself, who do I look at for change? And it's easy to go to the top. It's easy to go to the people that make the decisions and have the money and the funding, when actually looking into myself and making sure that I provide fully inclusive care that is non-bias, is non-prejudice. That's what's important to me. The policymakers at the top, they don't see what we do every day. And I think sometimes looking to them for change, they're never going to experience it like we do. So it's when your colleagues are prejudiced, when your friends are prejudiced, when your family is prejudiced, they're the microclimates that you really need to focus on. They're the people that you really need to educate, because you may never meet the people at the top, but the people that you do 12.5-hour night shifts with as a student, they're the people that you can educate and you can change. So especially for myself, I am pansexual, and I'm also in an ethical polyamorous heterosexual relationship. For some people, what does that mean? What are all these words that you are saying to me that I don't understand? I thought you were bisexual. Okay, let me just break it down for you. So it's easier if I'm bisexual, but no, in recent years I realised that I actually just, I didn't have a preference, and I didn't feel like I had to have a preference. I'm attracted to men, I'm attracted to women, I am attracted to whoever I'm attracted to, and I am extremely happy living my life like that. And the same comes about with my polyamorous heterosexual relationship. Some people are very confused by that. They are like, so you're gay, but you're with a man, but you're not just with that man, you are with other people. But like it was previously said, there are so many different layers, there are so many different negotiations and talks and trying things, and if something doesn't seem right, you don't do it again, because you're a partnership. Just because you're polyamorous doesn't mean that the intrinsic part of that polyamory are the two people at the center of that polyamory that make those decisions, that have those discussions, and respecting each other. So yeah, that was my little rant. I kind of went off paper for a little bit, but I hope that was all right. Yeah, so that's me. Thanks.
Well, of course you can go out of the paper. We're trying to be outside of everything that's established. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, that's
okay.
Very personal, and I think it's very helpful for other people to hear it, because maybe they're feeling things like similar, like sometimes being confused by the own labels that we sometimes pick. And I think that's something that is across all of your species. Like sometimes we feel pressure to explain to other people things that we don't even understand about ourselves.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'm gay, and then, but I like men more. So am I bisexual? But I only like that one. But what if I don't want to have sex? Am I asexual? And then it's a very huge confusion in top of everything else that's happening.
Yeah.
Where you're from, the color of your skin, if you have an education or not, and everything goes there. And it can be very confusing. Around the mental health, unfortunately, it's very common that kids that are struggling with their gender identity especially have a lot of confusion, and sometimes they can even have suicidal ideation, because when you're struggling with your own identity and you have the whole community that you were saying, maybe it can be your parents, your your sister, your brother asking you and saying, no, you're not, no, this is just a phase, it can really affect your self-esteem. It can really affect how you see the world, how you see yourself. And I think that's something very important that we need to know. And I'm trying to, of course, if Christy or anybody else that's here wants to say something or ask something to Emma or Christy, please be ahead. But I was just picking some of the words that were mentioned by you for all the speakers. And first, I think it will come with education. Mm-hmm. Everybody has to be educated in this, not only in the LGBT community, but in sexuality, in affective responsibility as well, in human rights, in respect, in how to address this type of conversation as well, because it's very common, and the same happens when we're talking about skin color, is that people that feel they are not on that community, they don't ask because they feel that they could be rude, they could be saying something wrong, so I better not ask. So they don't ask their own friends or the people that they know, would you like me to call you she, he, they, how do you feel, do you have anything planned for the Pride Month or nothing? So it's just, it becomes they and us. And I think that's very, very challenging if we want to have a world that is more respectful to everyone, especially if there are some people living in countries where you can even have the death penalty just because of who you are attracted to. And I think that's very dangerous. And it's not only the job, again, of the LGBT community to educate on that, it's also about people that are heterosexual and allosexual, that means having sexual desire, to search more, to ask more, to even explore more, because like Danilo was saying, sexuality, it doesn't have to be something static. You can feel attracted to some people at a certain age, and then that can stop. And then you can start feeling attraction for other people, and you shouldn't be needing to say no because I poked a label, I cannot change, because that is only taking freedom of yourself as well. The other thing where Angie was saying, trans is freedom, and for her, that quest, that it was a very long struggle, ended up by herself feeling free. And I think that's the power of naming things. That's the power of saying, okay, I feel a little bit different, and I think maybe the first 3 letters, they don't mean anything to me. Maybe I will extend, and that's why it's like LGTB, and then you have I, Q, allo, and then you have the asexuality, and then you have aromantic, and you have pansexual, and it's like, it's getting bigger because we need more ways to try to fit in this community without trying to fit in this community like by force. And I just wanted to end with what Christy was saying, that Pride started with a riot. It started with a Black trans woman. So this is something that goes across human rights as well. It's not something disconnected. This talk is not disconnected from the last talk about Black Lives Matter. And it's sad, but it's also a very, like, it shows strength that usually the oppressed are the ones to put the flag on and to say this cannot happen anymore. And that's happening with a lot of communities around the world, the LGBT community, the Black Lives Matter movement, the feminism as well. And I think when we put all of that together and we have the intersectionality, it's a whole world of like, you can be a woman, but you can be Black, but you can be trans, and then but you can be asexual. So you have so many layers, and usually the world will try to position you in one and say, okay, but if you're a lesbian, represent them. No, you represent yourself. If you want, you can be an activist. You don't need to be an activist just because you're gay. But I think education and self-love is something very important, and that I can see in all of the speeches that you were saying. So thank you again for everyone that was listening, everyone that shared their experiences. Thank you so much for that. I know it takes courage because this is not the first time somebody asks you about that. And it's not going to be the last one. At least in this space, you decide what you want to say. And I think that was the main of it. So thank you so much. And this is going to be on YouTube after. If you want to rewatch it and share with your friends, please make the message go more beyond this. So thank you so much. Molly saying thank you, and people here on Instagram as well. So thank you, Emma. Thank you, Christy. And I'm going to mention thank you, Helena, Aníbal that couldn't be here, Angie and Danilo. Hi,
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Live your best life.
That's a good one. Yeah.